discretion is advised. This is 10-Minute Murder.
In 1837, Amelia Dyer was born in Bristol, UK. She was an intelligent child who loved to read and write. But her childhood, as you're going to hear, was not an easy one. Her older sister, Sarah Ann, died at the age of 6, and when her mother gave birth to another child, the little girl was named Sarah Ann in her memory. Unfortunately, the second Sarah Ann also passed away. After catching typhus fever, Amelia's mother was not in a very good position to be caring for her children. Her diagnosis caused her to suffer from violent outbursts of rage, as well as uncontrolled symptoms of mental illness. From a young age, Amelia was forced to act as her mother's caregiver, and then when she was a preteen, her mother passed away. Amelia was then sent to live with one of her aunts and become the apprentice to a local corset maker. When Amelia was 24 years old, she met a much older man, 59-year-old George Thomas. They decided to get married, and both lied about their age when filling in their details on their marriage certificate. Amelia pretended to be 6 years older, and George pretended to be 11 years younger. On paper, their age gap didn't look very alarming, but in reality, George was old enough to be her grandfather. Amelia originally trained to work as a nurse, but after George passed away in 1869, she needed better money, and she needed it quickly. On the advice of a friend, she turned to a different career: baby farming. At the time, baby farming was the term used after the incredibly unethical process of taking babies who had been orphaned or birthed by single mothers in exchange for a cash payment. The problem with baby farming was obvious. Even though some baby farmers took regular payments from the child's birth parents, many of them chose to only accept large upfront payments before the baby was permanently transferred into their care. In this case, there was no financial reason for the farmers to treat the child well. Many baby farmers would neglect the adopted infants, starving them to save money. When the infants died, the coroners would report that the cause of death had been due to birth defect or lack of breast milk, instead of starvation due to neglect. It was pretty easy for baby farmers to silence the cries of a neglected baby. Over-the-counter syrups containing opium or alcohol were marketed towards frustrated mothers. These cough syrups were strong enough to kill an infant by overdose, and the ones that contained opium also acted as a hunger suppressant. When single mothers who had given their babies up for adoption came in to check on them, they often saw signs of neglect, but because the stigma surrounding single motherhood, they were too ashamed to press charges or report the baby farm to the police. At first, it's possible Amelia grew genuinely tired of trying to care for the babies that she adopted, as well as her 2 own children, but it's equally possible that she was neglecting them from the start, and multiple of the babies Amelia adopted passed away. Investigation into the deaths of the babies led to Amelia being charged with child neglect and sentenced to 6 months of hard labor. But after her labor was completed, Amelia was free to go back to baby farming. The second time around, Amelia's attitude was completely different. She felt that she had tried her best to care for the babies and had been punished for it. Now, she saw no reason to care for them at all. She gained the trust of young single mothers, treating them kindly and promising to love and take care of their newborns as if they were her own children. She painted a picture of herself as a maternal woman who loved children and wanted to help them. After accepting their payments, she neglected the babies, depriving them of food on purpose until they were starved to death. But this method took too much time. She knew that if babies died quicker, she'd be able to replace them with new ones and accumulate even more money. She also realized the error of her ways in the past, and not in a good way. When she'd asked before the local doctor to certify the deaths of the infants, he'd become suspicious of the sheer amount of deaths that were occurring under her care. This is likely where she started to brutally murder each child that was entrusted in her care, strangling them to death and then dumping their corpses to avoid detection. Somehow, she was allowed to continue adopting hundreds of children, despite her previous conviction for neglect and multiple episodes of mental instability that led to her spending time in numerous asylums throughout her adult life. It was the 30th of March, 1896, when a baby's remains were found in a bag floating down London's River Thames. It was a little girl, identified as Helena Fry. The paper that had been used to wrap the body contained a barely legible address, the home of Amelia Dyer, who had been making a living as a baby farmer for almost 3 decades while repeatedly moving locations and going in and out of psychiatric care. The police raided Amelia's home. As soon as they walked through the door, they smelled an overpowering odor of decomposition, but the search didn't uncover any human remains. What they did find was evidence of how many children had passed through Amelia's care over the years. Advertisements, unanswered letters from single mothers who had given their children, and telegrams about the adoption of infants. From this evidence alone, investigators guessed that around 20 babies had been given to Amelia in the past few months. They also uncovered something that would become more significant later in the investigation: large quantities of edging tape. On the 4th of April, Amelia Dyer was placed under arrest for murder. Initially, her son-in-law, Arthur, was arrested as an accessory to murder, but those charges were later dropped. Allegedly, at least one of Amelia's adult daughters was also aware of her mother's activities, but Amelia insisted that this was not the case. Amelia might have been a lot of things, but she definitely was not a snitch. Investigators dredged the Thames and uncovered the remains of 6 more infants. They were all called in the same way, by strangulation with the same type of white measuring tape. Later on, Amelia admitted to the police that the measuring tape, quote, was how you could tell it was one of mine. One of the babies was identified as Doris Marmon, whose mother had given her to Amelia less than 2 weeks before her body was found. In the advertisement that Doris's mother had responded to, Amelia had written, quote, I don't want a child for money's sake, but for the company and home comfort. I and my husband are dearly fond of children. I have no child of my own. A child with me will have a good home and a mother's love. Despite Doris's mother wanting to pay in regular installments, hoping that she would one day be reunited with her baby when the circumstances were better, Amelia had insisted on a one-off payment. She had killed Doris shortly after being paid, then dumped her in the Thames. Amelia's crimes had generated a huge amount of public outrage. The trial was sensational, and crowds gathered to hear the verdict. It took the jury less than 5 minutes to make up their decision. So many babies had been given to Amelia and then seemingly vanished altogether. It was estimated that she might have killed as many as 400 babies during her 30-year career, and possibly even more than that. This number, if it had been proven, would make her one of the most prolific serial killers in the history of the world. After the public uproar that Amelia's trial had caused, it was clear that something needed to change. It had been way too easy for Amelia to get away with not just one murder, but hundreds. The laws regarding child protection and adoption were made stricter, and the recently formed National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children became well known across the country. On the 10th of June, Amelia's execution date arrived. She stepped up to the scaffold. Her executioner, James Billington, asked her if she had any last words. Quote, I have nothing to say. Amelia responded before she was hanged to death. After her conviction, the public gave Amelia the nickname the Ogress of Reading. Over the next few years, she became the subject of a ballad by the same name. The old baby farmer, the wretched Miss Dyer. At the Old Bailey, her wages is paid. In times long ago, we'd make a big fryer and roast it so nicely, that wicked old jade. That is 10-Minute Murder for today. Brief and bingeable true crime. I'm Joe, I'm the host, and thank you for listening today. And thank you to the person that submitted that story idea to 10-Minute Murder. By the way, if you have one, joe@10minutemurder.com. That's where you can send it. I don't get to talk about these historic cases very often, and I will. I know what you're thinking. Have you talked about H.H. Holmes or Jack the Ripper? No, haven't done those stories. I will do them. I promise I will do them. Those have been emailed to me multiple times. They're on the list, but I don't want to do them the way that everyone else would do them. But I'm trying to make it more interesting than just the plain old, here are the facts of everything you've ever heard a million times. I don't want to do that. All right, so our question for today is actually multiple. It's kind of a novel. Lori from Ocala, Florida. You wrote me a novel, Lori. So I'm going to do my best. I'm going to edit it, by the way, because there's a lot here and the podcast is only so long. Here it is. Hi, Joe. I have some questions for you to answer the podcast. I hate the sound of my own voice, and most people seem to not like to hear their voices on a recording. Do you like the sound of your voice, or does it make you cringe as well? And the answer is, it's all right. I guess it could be worse. It could be better. I don't think very many people like to hear their own voice on a recording, but I've been doing it for so long that at this point, it doesn't bother me anymore. I sound how I sound, and I can't do anything about it. Okay, part 2. I'm running out of true crime shows and movies. What are your recommendations? Very recently, as in today, I watched Killers Caught on Camera, but I'm only like 2 episodes into that. It's on Tubi, and it's not bad. And another one that I watched, I think I posted on social media about it, The Curious Case of Natalia Grace. And that one's not a murder case, but it's, I guess, true crime, and it's very weird, very strange. I'm not going to spoil it for you in case you're going to watch it, but there is one person in there, he's a guy, that makes the show nearly unwatchable. I don't know if it's an act or that's who he really is, but if you've seen this, you know exactly who I'm talking about, but it's so weird and strange. All right, and the last question, I love what you do, and I've always loved anything crime. I used to work at a domestic violence shelter for women and children because I wanted to help people. Have you ever worked in any humanitarian type jobs or crime-related jobs? And that answer is no. But I guess you can't really call it a job if you're just volunteering your time. But I've done that. I've volunteered at multiple charities, and I've sat on boards for a couple of different charities where we're doing humanitarian type things, but I'm not getting paid to do that. So that's not what I would consider a job, but I do volunteer for charities. And crime-related jobs, no. I've worked in the news world before. I've done news reporting on the radio, and I've done behind-the-scenes things at news TV stations, but I've never worked in crime. We reported crime, but I didn't work with like law enforcement or anything like that. But if it counts, I wanted to be Fox Mulder when I was a kid, and that probably doesn't count. All right, thank you, Lori from Ocala, Florida. By the way, if this is your first time listening to 10 Minute Murder, please subscribe now so that you can catch up on all the back episodes and never miss any of the new ones. Connect with me on social media. Links are in the show notes of this episode. Also, you can go and leave me a review. If you listen on Apple or any place that takes reviews, your positive feedback very much helps this podcast grow. Go to 10minutemurder.com for all things related to 10 Minute Murder.